Hi guys, greetings, beautiful creatures from all over the world. A massive thanks for joining us today. My name is Fatima Amnuraniza Bajindayola, but you may just call me FD or Fatima, but actually preferably FD because I have some cousins here whose name is also Fatima. So either works though, but yeah. Welcome to the fourth episode of Diari Filem, organized by the Cinematic Arts Society. To the team behind this event, thank you so much for organizing and curating this webinar for both our panelists and our audience to have the opportunity to learn from one another. There are hundreds of thousands of films out there, and yet we still make films up to this day. So that begs the question, why make films? Especially during this pandemic, it is crucial to know the importance of making art like films, not just for entertainment, but also for the artists to express themselves. So today we are joined by three amazing panelists, and let me introduce them to everyone. First, we have Mr. Arjun Thanaraju. He is a film and theater maker with a passion for telling contemporary Malaysian stories. His stage plays Emergency and Arrange have received awards at the Short and Sweet Theater Festival hosted by the Kuala Lumpur Performing Arts Center. Arjun made his acting debut in Anomalist Productions' BOH Cameroonian Arts Award-winning play, Politic, and has since worked with director and mentor Khairi Anwar on multiple stage and screen projects, including his first feature film, Mentega Terbang, which was screened to sold-out audiences in both Malaysia and Indonesia. Arjun also co-starred in Adam Ashburn's Showreel and wrote and directed Come Home, the latter of which marks his debut as a film director. Through his work, Arjun hopes to give untold Malaysian stories a voice, even if that voice must speak alone. Secondly, we have Franz Bohm. He is a filmmaker originally from Stuttgart, Germany. At 16, after working his way up to first assistant director, he made his first solo film, Harmony der Anderen. After working for the German TV channel ZDF, Franz's next project found him living with youth experiencing homelessness. The resulting documentary, Christmas Wishes, was selected as the opening film for the German Youth Film Awards. Franz then directed the short drama Good Luck, which premiered at the British Independent Film Festival. Following his work for the documentary production company 1185 Films, Franz is currently developing new projects in London. Dear Future Children is his debut first feature film, which was awarded the Audience Award at its world premiere at the 42nd Max Fields Prize Film Festival. Its international premieres were held at the CPH Docs and Hot Docs International Film Festival. At Hot Docs, it won the Audience Award, making him the youngest filmmaker ever to receive this award, and qualifies the film for the Academy Awards to shortlist. Last but not least, we have Nadira Illana. She is a filmmaker and independent film programmer from Kota Kinabalu, Sabah. Though she started out making experimental films, she is best known for Freedom Film Fest-winning political documentary The Silent Riot. She uses film as a way to explore her Borneo heritage, impressing on cultural sensitivity and time as a means to tell meaningful stories. In 2015, Nadira committed to a year-long film residency in rural Sabah as part of an Australian community participatory project, Big Stories Bongkod the Mouse, which culminated in a film premiere of community-made films attended by 1,000 people with support from FINAS, the Malaysian Film Council. Let us give them a round of virtual applause. All right, so before we formally start, let me remind the audience that you may ask your questions in three different ways. The first one is to raise your hand and wait for me to acknowledge you before you unmute and ask your questions. This will be the prioritized way of asking questions, just so we could promote interactivity between our audience and the panelists. Secondly, you may ask your questions through the Zoom chat box. And lastly, to everyone who's on Facebook Live right now, please do drop your questions in the comment section and our team will forward them to me. So let us start. I would like to ask the most basic question to our panelists just to get an idea on how they started off as filmmakers. How did you find the voice that filmmaking is for you? Let us start with Mr. Arjun.
Right. So very interesting question for me because film was honestly never sort of like on the cards for me. I actually don't even come from like an arts background. I am a science student, currently pursuing my PhD in neuroscience. So very much, day job is being a science student. And in terms of the arts, I started out as a theater writer at first, and spent about, I don't know, 8 to 10 years being writing and acting for theater. And then the pandemic hit. So in 2020, when everything shut down and theaters shut down, theater makers were left with no real avenue to tell our stories, and in an attempt to do something, we sort of banded together, and that's where Mantega Terbang comes from, which I think we'll come to a little later. So essentially for me, film is just an extension of what I was doing in theater, of just wanting to get stories out there. Specifically for me, growing up as an Indian person, as a brown person in Malaysia, there are a lot of stories that I feel my community needs to be told, and we don't really get opportunities to do that, especially on the big screen. So in terms of finding a voice, it started off as finding a voice for my community, and it has sort of blossomed from there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Arjun. That was an insightful thoughts, especially during the pandemic. It's really hard for artists to get out there. Secondly, we would like to hear from Franz.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thanks again so much for the invitation. I think for me, it was somewhat similar. For me, the fascination for filmmaking and watching films and also making films started when I was still quite young. When I was 11 years old, I very unexpectedly lost my father in an accident, and I was able to sort of overcome the resulting family crisis by just watching a lot of films, and found films and filmmaking and the whole creation of this magic, frankly, as a personal escape space almost, and quite soon realized that many, marginalized groups and smaller communities, perhaps also underrepresented communities, can find, well, I mean, they already have a voice, but films perhaps can support and give an even broader platform to their voices. And especially now in this increasingly noisy world, I would say it's even more important that we start listening to each other. And I think that's where films can do a really brilliant job.
Thank you, Franz. I could personally resonate to what you just said about like watching films and like getting inspired to take on filmmaking. And I hope everyone in the audience could actually like relate as well. All right, so let us hear, last but not least, Nadira, how about you? How did you find the voice that filmmaking is for you?
I mean, it's such a loaded question because I feel that I was kind of made to be a filmmaker in the sense I just loved watching a lot of films when I was a kid, to the point that my mom actually like sellotaped me to the TV one time because like I didn't want to go to bed. I mean, like, kind of I shouldn't be proud of that. But anyway, but no, I think around high school, I realized that I was creative and multifaceted. I was writing poetry. I loved music. And I guess like film became this sort of like an automatic or very natural sort of thing to be inclined towards. And I started to watch a lot of films at the time in the cinemas and like films like The Matrix and all that, right? And then thinking like, whoa, okay, how do they make that? How do they make that? And so my curious mind kept wanting to break down the process. And I think a lot of filmmakers these guys can relate to it, I'm sure. But then, so I was very fortunate that I got to go to film school abroad. So I was in Australia, and then I did a student exchange in the States. But my passion really was in Southeast Asian cinema, because I was growing up in Sabah, like I didn't have a lot of like mediums to sort of like see myself, because Malaysian media is very peninsula centric. And so I didn't have a lot of sort of visual references for what I looked like, especially as an indigenous person. So I've had a very unusual journey in that sense, that I studied film and then I moved back to Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur in particular, and realized that Malaysian cinema did not represent my experience at all, and that people in the peninsula didn't really, Borneo is the third largest island in the world, and we were not part of the imaginings of Malaysia, the Malaysian narrative or landscape. And so from there, I think some of my earlier films were more political, historical. You're kind of like screwed when like people in the punk scene have to make, national propaganda, on the government's behalf, because there just wasn't that representation to be found. And so apart from making short films and documentaries, another way that I realized that I could probably do a bit more of my activism work, or because I kept getting pushed out of those spaces as an East Malaysian. There were so many issues to do with like cultural misappropriation of Borneo stories and that kind of thing, that I felt that the only way I could take back control of that narrative was to become a producer and a film programmer. So at Dilan Bulan Films, which is my company, we try to emphasize a lot on inclusivity and how do we, respectfully and insightfully give each other space.
Thank you, Nadira. Actually, I could also like resonate to that one because I am from the Philippines. I am from the very south. I'm from Sulu, very near to Sabah, actually. So it's also the same thing that we don't really like have like representation in the mainstream Philippine cinema. So that's something that I also want to change. So thank you so much for like sharing your experience on that one. So let us move on to some questions that I've made, and I hope that after this we will entertain some from our audience. So dear audience, do think of questions from now so that we could address that later on. All right. Okay. So Mr. Arjun, all right. So you are the scriptwriter and the actor for Mentega Terbang. And the film is actually philosophical, but done in a very lighthearted way that even little children would understand its essence. So may you share with us the process and the challenges of writing the film, but at the same time being an actor to it,
Right. So I guess I'll talk about the writing first, because I think that was where a lot of the actual time for Mentega went to. Just for context though, so Mentega Terbang was made in response to the Kuman Pictures Feature Film Challenge. So for this challenge, it was from date of announcement of the challenge to the actual submission of the film was 2 months. So the idea was, in the pandemic, we were called to make a feature film in 2 months. So that includes, like everything from writing to post-production and submission. So essentially in terms of writing, we, like our director Carrie, I know, sort of came up with the initial premise of wanting to talk about religion, or rather the freedom to choose your religion in Malaysia, because in his words, he mentioned that in some ways, actually being a Muslim in Malaysia is harder than being a non-Muslim in Malaysia. And he grew up, going to Sekolah Agama and going to the religious schools. And he wanted to really sort of talk about that experience through his first film. So when he approached us with that premise, he built a team of like 3, I guess, in his mind, young script writers. So it was me, Vishnu Varman, and Tita Hoy, who have never written for film before. So he got the 3 of us, and the idea was, okay, we have 2 months to make this film. We'll try and write. If it doesn't go anywhere, it's fine. It would have been a good exercise. But if it goes somewhere, we'll try and produce it. So obviously, when he approached us with the premise, it's quite daunting, as a first time writer, and this Malay Muslim man is like, I want to talk about Islam in this country, and he's approaching 3 non-Muslims to sort of write the bulk of the story. So we were like, okay, cool. So when so this happened in like, I think mid 2020. In early 2020, I unfortunately lost my uncle who passed away. And what I noticed is that in the period of Hindu mourning, with our prayers and stuff, there was actually a lot of discussion about religion, or specifically in our case, we were talking about reincarnation. We were talking about, where does the soul go after death and all those things. So in our eyes, then approaching death as a way to ground the idea of religion made sense, because it takes away this confrontation that comes when you talk about religion, and you focus more on the humane aspect of what religion means to the individual, as opposed to what religion means to a larger society, I guess. And that's essentially how we started writing. So we knew that the characters, were centered around an Indian boy, and we were going to talk about Hinduism and how that relates to Islam and how that relates to Christianity. So Khairi Anwar, our director and also head writer, he was very mindful of having proper representation in the writing room and not just thinking about that when we're casting. He wanted the people whose communities were being represented to actually be in the writing room. So we had myself, who, I come from a multi-faith household, so from Christianity and Hinduism. Vishnu is a practicing Hindu, and Teng Hoi was a Buddhist. And we sort of brought all those elements into the actual writing of it. So in terms of that, I will say like the biggest challenge for us was, in the back of our minds, there was this idea of censorship and like how much do we censor ourselves? Because again, we come from a theater background where censorship really isn't a thing in theater, where we sort of write whatever it is that we want to do and just put on stage, and there isn't this governing body per se that comes in and checks it and approves plays to go on stage. But that is the case with unfortunately with film in Malaysia. So there were a lot of challenges of like, okay, how far do we push this? How much do we really talk about it? How much do we really dive into it? But I think we found a balance between making a film that would actually reach people but also still have something to say. So that's the writing bit. In terms of the acting bit, I was never meant to be in the film, right? So I came in as a writer. Wrote the script and we sent it off to auditions. And I think through auditions, we never really found the Suresh that Khairi was looking for. And obviously I was there at the auditions as the writer, reading lines. And I had worked with Shuma, who plays Aisha, before, and that is sort of our relationship in real life. So Khairi was like, why don't you come tomorrow, like shaved, and we'll see, we'll do a screen test and we'll see how it is. And I guess it worked, So that's essentially how I came into to be an actor, but very much joined Mentega as a writer, and that's where I think a lot of my experience was.
Thank you so much, Arjun, for sharing that. Well, that was amazing to hear, actually. Just a context for everyone, especially international audience. Mentega Terbang is actually a film about this girl. After finding out that her mom is terminally ill with cancer, she was on a journey of like finding out what happens after death in so many like religion. Like she's Muslim, but like she's exploring, like I say, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, and all of that. So just a little context. Okay, so thank you so much again, Arjun. That was really like amazing to hear, really. All right, so let's proceed to Franz. So Dear Future Children is an eye-opening film that I honestly believe every youth out there should watch. I understand that there are dangers in making this film, from pre-production to post-production, and most especially production. But even now that the film is done and it's traveling the world from festival to festival, your team still receives threats left and right. I actually did see your story before. It was like really alarming, to be honest. And so my question would be is that, so what pushes you to continue making films like Dear Future Children despite the risk that comes with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks so much. We are still receiving threats and also hacker attacks and all different sorts of attempts to stop our project almost on a daily basis. It happened straight after our crowdfunding campaign and after we sort of publicly spoke about the project and spoke about the fact that we have a Hong Kong activist in the project as well for the first time. We knew that this will come. We knew that this is obviously a sensitive topic. And that one country specifically will have a problem with us making that project. So quite early on, we researched that issue, that field quite a lot, and we're quite surprised and slightly disappointed that there doesn't seem to be a clear strategy for filmmakers like us talking about these projects. And we actually heard from quite a few people that, they have received similar threats and then just stopped doing the project. So kind of did exactly what they want us to do, right? So quite early on, we thought, okay, perhaps this is something we need to change, we need to adjust a little bit. And then started a really amazing collaboration with the universities of Harvard and Stanford, who helped us to create an international infrastructure in order to protect our project, in order to protect our protagonists, our film material, and also, our email addresses, our bank accounts, and all that. And many of the hacker attacks, for example, against our website and against our mail accounts, we were able to trace them back and find out more information about who is actually doing that. So I have to say that these threats, sometimes obviously it's scary. Sometimes it's crossing a line, crossing a boundary. Just for example, there was a printed out sheet of paper with sort of my face on it with a wanted sign. And that was stapled on my grandmother's house in Germany, which I think is sort of, not funny anymore. And nevertheless, though, that all helps us in understanding more about our opponent here. And it will actually make it much more safer, or at least much more, we'll be able to calculate it in a better way in the future when we are doing similar projects in the future. And I think not a single member of our team was ever thinking about stopping or canceling the project because of these threats. In the opposite, I think it confirmed why we are doing this project in the first place. And I think receiving these form of threats, although it is not, not comfortable or not funny at all, is almost like a good sign in a way. It just shows that apparently the story is trying to be suppressed in a way. And then it's more about thinking of the best strategy to use that. And I think that's an attitude that is shared by our whole team. Was it scary? Yes. Did it motivate us to do this even bigger and even further? Yes, as well.
Thank you so much, Franz. Again, for some context to everyone who's present in the audience, Dear Future Children is an activist. It's a youth activist film. It's focused on 3 young females from 3 different countries. There's one in Hong Kong, Chile, and Uganda. And again, especially like Hong Kong, you could see that this is something that is still happening. And quite personally, I'm from the Philippines and I have friends who are activists. And this is something that perhaps some of them would experience as well, like the fear of the police and all of that. So, but thank you so much, Franz. And I'm so grateful that I was able to watch your film twice. Anyway, let's move on to Nadira. So uplifting the voices of the minority and telling contemporary stories about Indigenous people is a must. And of course, showcasing the importance of finding your roots and showing it on the big screen can be a tough process. And since this is something you are very passionate about, I'd like to ask, what are the challenges you've faced in making films about your identity?
Sorry, it's a very long list because it's very challenging because it will test you in many different ways. Like I didn't come into this. I'm not the first ever Sabahan or Borneo filmmaker, definitely. But as a Indigenous woman who is, because like Borneo films for a long time have been sort of like straight to DVD films, whereas in the peninsula, like you have, very traditional sort of like theatrical releases, festivals, and that kind of thing. East Malaysia's creative industries was deliberately suppressed by the federal government for decades in order to sort of control minority voices and uphold this this identity of Malay supremacy. And when you take Indigenous peoples and then sort of like stop them from being able to produce their own content, that is how that's a form of voter suppression, really. So it wasn't so much just that I had a lot of challenges on my own trying to go and learn about my Indigenous Dusun heritage almost from scratch through my films, because I didn't really get to grow up with it. I grew up in the city, and both sides of my family are different types of Dusun, or like, it's how to explain it. The Indigenous groups in Sabah are district centric. So from one town to the next, they have a different language. They might have a different language, a different adat, or a different way of learning, of wearing these costumes. And there's another layer to it, which is that I've almost had to be my own anthropologist, really. And so the thing is, like, even in Sabah for decades too, during the Osno times, anthropologists were banned from coming to Sabah. So the records to find anything about my culture are very, very few, or a lot of the times they're in text. Compared to Sarawak, where you have the Brooke family, where they emphasize on archives and museums, Sabah doesn't have that same resource. That's why Sarawak has more tattoos. Like, they have more of these like records for their tattoos. Sabah doesn't have that visual reference. So I guess for me, like, it has had to be that I have to think about it in the contemporary sense. I'm a very modern person myself, like third culture kid, admittedly, but I see the magic in it, in the sense that, you know, it's very easy through the process of colonization to remove the self-esteem and the dignity of a people, till they get smaller and smaller and they feel like their stories absolutely don't matter. So creatively, and also in my process, I guess I consider decolonization. I think about how to be able to sort of like position, you know, the narrative of the story, you know, forward. I like how Khairi Anwar does his films. Like, just even hearing about the process with you, like from you, Arjun, is like really heartening, because honestly, not enough people think about this. In the Philippines, it's not unusual for young activists, for young people to be activists, but in Malaysia, to be an activist and an artist at the same time is still a little bit taboo, because we've been conditioned to think that entertainment is just entertainment. Do not bring politics into that cultural sphere. So to make content that is entertaining, that is visually stunning, that is mainstream, also being able to sort of like slowly chip away at those barriers, you know, so you can bring a minority story or community films to a Maxis ad, which is what we did last year with the Kamatan Borneo Harvest Festival stories. I mean, those are really big wins for us. Getting that kind of visibility for people who are not usually heard.
Thank you so much, Nadira. That's something that, honestly, that's something that a lot of people in the Philippines are actually like that. They would resonate something along the lines of that, because again, like especially for me, is that I'm from the South.
Mindanao.
This is something
I'm quite aware.
I'm Mindanao. I'm from Sulu.
Yeah, so because I've traveled there before, and I know a lot of the filmmakers from there as well. So the Southern Philippines has a lot of the similar issues that East Malaysia has in being the othered by the capital.
I definitely agree.
But I have so much respect for the filmmakers there, because one, they're so in touch with their mysticism. It's a very difficult, war-torn sort of country. But why I always give my hat off to the Philippines is their level of ethics and activism, you know, just like stepping up to just do what is right is just so like second nature. And I want to see more of that. I do have an agenda. I want to see more of that in Malaysia, because there's such an urgency for it. I mean, going back to the idea of like, why do we make films, right? Why do we make films? Why do we do our laundry? Why do we cook? Because somebody has to wake up and eat the next day, because we got to live. And that's why we make films. And because life is ongoing. And if we don't document it, you know, it's almost tantamount to not living. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. Again, all our panelists are making films that are something that the people need to watch. And that's something that I really applaud you guys, because honestly, it's something that people should do more, you know, because if no one's going to do it, then who else, right? So, all right, I will try to give the floor to our audience now. You may raise your hands if you have a question, a burning question. You could raise it now. But in the meantime, if no one's going to raise their hand, I have some questions. All right, so someone asked, we know that the film industry is one of the industries that has been greatly affected by the pandemic. Can you share your realizations while doing films at this time? Anyone from the panelists could answer this? Anyone want to go first?
I can go first.
Okay.
Yeah, I think obviously the pandemic affected all industries, and the film industry was no exemption for that. I think in many ways, and I'm sure that you know, the other panelists and all filmmakers here agree that making a film always feels like facing so many different challenges and so many different problems. And I personally constantly have the feeling that almost like the entire world doesn't want us to make this film, and everyone is kind of working against you, although you don't really feel it, but it just happens, right? And on the shooting day itself, usually for example, the weather is really bad or some spontaneous problems are coming up. So it feels like the pandemic was sort of an additional large challenge to the existing level of problems and issues we were already facing. And let me also underscore that I think that although the film industry has amazing, perhaps the greatest people working in the industry, it not necessarily has the greatest leaderships, especially not during the past few years and decades, which sort of resulted in a few struggles and issues that we now, as a young generation, as a new generation of filmmakers, need to tackle head on. And I even believe, and I'm not trying to undermine the pandemic, and I'm not trying to undermine anyone's problem with the pandemic, but I think we even have larger problems, especially when it comes to classism, sexism, and again, the underrepresentation of specific communities than the pandemic itself. And the pandemic perhaps somehow showed these struggles in a more urgent way. I think for many young filmmakers, that meant rethinking and restructuring their distribution processes. And also, I do believe that the pandemic showed a global audience how important films actually are, because that's what everybody was doing during the pandemic, especially during the first few months, is just watching films. And I think there were a few interesting possibilities for us to showcase our films in a better way. And I think the accessibility of the film industry, for me personally, is something that we need to fix as soon as possible. Just some thoughts.
Right. Thank you for sharing, Franz. Anyone else in panelists?
Yeah, I guess I'll just add to what he just said. I think the biggest realization, if that's the word, is that filmmakers will find a way. And that was something that I learned very quickly, because again, Mandega was shot like right after the first lockdown was lifted, and this was a time where people were like, do we go into the office? It was that kind of situation. And Kyrie's like, let's bring like 20-30 people and figure this out, obviously. And then we had like a week of meetings of like, how do we do this safely, right? Because obviously we're not trying to have an outbreak called Mantega Terbang outbreak or a cluster. But it's just having to go that extra mile and do those extra steps of making sure that the film gets made. But at no point, in the room, it wasn't like, oh, maybe we should stop, or maybe we should put this on hold. It was always like, we have to do this. Let's just figure out how. And yeah, I think that energy is something that is very pure with filmmakers, and I hope that, especially if everyone is students here, I hope that is something that you guard and you protect that dire need to make films, and just keep finding a way to make films.
Sorry, I lost it for a moment there when Arjun started, because you're right, filmmakers are cockroaches. It's really hard to get in our way. It's true, because I've gone through so many massive challenges before, where you have to have reshoots, anything can happen on a film set, but you push through. So when the pandemic happened as well, I actually barely watched any films. I was actually going back into music. I was listening to a lot of music. I think I didn't want to watch films because I would get FOMO. I would just get FOMO because I'm like, I can't be outside. I can't shoot that. No, I don't want to watch films. I was having a miniature inner protest for myself. But that was the first year. Work was very difficult in the first year. But I think in the second year, what coincided with it was the pandemic, but I think it coincided as well with where I am in my life and my career, which was that I actually had an amazing career. I had an amazing year last year, because the thing about Malaysia, is that because we're separated by the South China Sea, and access is a very complicated thing. A lot of the infrastructure, everything is like concentrated in Kuala Lumpur. So even for the Borneo filmmakers, even for our own stories, we have to compete with the Peninsula Malaysians, to be able to tell our own stories. But because there were the COVID travel restrictions, I got a job to basically go and shoot in Sabah, and we could only have a Sabahan team. So we got to kind of like capitalize on that little bit. I mean, we're not trying to say no West Malaysians a lot in Sabah, not at all. But it was just really amazing how I think almost in a way it was fated that we were able to, because I didn't always have this luxury. When I first started shooting in 2012, we didn't even have 2 C stands in Sabah. You want to try to find equipment, you want to try to find sound gear, you want to try to find crew. It was just really hard to scrape by. But for whatever reason, I think there have been a lot of developments throughout the generations, and you see a lot of young people in East Malaysia who are hungry. And I think we got to I was just very proud of the projects that we were able to push out, and that clients were a lot more open about us going full Borneo with it, because usually there's a whole don't speak in your accent, we want something indigenous, but don't make it mystical. There was absolutely none of that. Like, a lot of our clients last year just came from an absolute place of respect, and because we could only have our meetings over Zoom, it took away that anxiety that minorities have when having to come into a room full of the status quo telling us how we should be telling our own stories. So for whatever reason, the pandemic alleviated that, and I hope that it kind of continues in that respect. It wasn't all that bad. But I do have to shoot a feature film this year during the pandemic, so I might just eat my words.
All right. Thank you so much, Nadira. Honestly, yeah, I do agree that filmmakers are cockroaches. Like, even as a film student myself, I was actually in Qatar for 2 years. I spent like 6 semesters in Qatar, and like Malaysia is like 5 hours away. So like all I could do is like do behind the computer, be a producer, and I can't really be a director at some point. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing your experiences, everyone's experiences during the pandemic as filmmakers. All right, so let's move on to another question before we have a game session later on. All right, so Jimmy asked, he actually has a lot of questions, but okay, let's just go on with something that is, okay, wait, someone raised their hand, and that's something that we have to prioritize. Sorry, Jamie, we'll get back to that later, okay? Zain Fanik, you may now unmute yourself. Please introduce yourself as well. Thank you.
Hi, Fatima. Thank you for this webinar. I'm Fatima's friend, so I'm really excited for this session. My name is Zain Fanik, and my question is for Franz, the director of Dear Future Children. I was so happy that I was able to watch it during Ajal Film Festival, and I didn't get to ask my question last time. So this is my question. It was, did the movie turn out to be different from how you envisioned it, or was it different? And was this difference like positive, negative, or surprising? Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks so much for your question. And I'm very glad that we finally have the opportunity to discuss that. It's a very interesting question. I think it turned out, it's more the question of what's the right vision for a documentary. And I believe that it is dangerous and wrong for a documentary director to have a clear goal of, okay, so in my opinion, things in Hong Kong are like this. So I'm now looking for someone who can support that specific statement so that I can make that film that is sort of in my hands. I think perhaps it's better to have the right question or the right questions and the right topics, general loose topics that we would like to explore a bit more. So we, for example, as a young team, as a very international team, we had a great fascination for young global modern activism and wanted to learn more about it and wanted to learn a bit more about who is behind these core movements, what motivates them, what kind of struggles do they have, what are their thoughts on the current process, is young activism a new form of very direct political participation. And with these very loose questions, we were traveling to these regions and speaking with lots of activists and journalists and NGOs and organizations on the ground. I know that, for example, when applying for funding, you need to like deliver a treatment where you almost like describe the whole film. You almost have to describe every single cut, right? So we usually do that. I usually do that, write it down, and then I give them the treatment and tell them the whole story and just make something up. And then the moment we get the funding, the whole treatment goes right into the trash bin, and we go to these regions or to these individuals whatsoever, with a clear and fresh mind. So in that sense, yes, it kind of fulfilled my vision, if you want to say so, because I just wanted to learn more about young activism. And I feel like with this film, that's possible. In a way, it was still surprising, if that answers your question as well, that I think I didn't calculate, or I didn't think that participating in these movements and filming on the ground will have such a great impact on us as a young team, especially, you know, seeing people dying on the streets, on the front lines was obviously very brutal for us. Even more brutal, obviously, for people on the ground. But perhaps we were a little bit naive when we were first planning the project in that regard. And then to add another layer to this answer, I wasn't expecting that this film will be so huge when it comes to distribution. I wasn't expecting that it will actually find distributors in many different countries, and that this film will be shown in actual cinemas and all that. I mean, you know, we were 19 years old when we were making this film, so that was just very, very unexpected for us. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a very great answer. Like, you answered it very well and detailed. So thank you. And I'm glad that the movie made it this big to cinemas. And it's very interesting how like your ideas changed after like you got all your funding and you had like a clear view. So thank you for spreading this message about the other political activities in other countries. And thanks for answering the question. Yeah.
Thank you, Franz. And thank you, Zain, for asking such wonderful question that we are actually all enlightened by the question and also by the answer of Franz. Okay, before we have our game session, first, Roxana, you may ask your question later. I'll get on to that. Nadira has a question for Franz. Let's try to address that first.
Thank you. Sorry, I cut the line. No, I'm really fascinated by. I'm so sorry I haven't had a chance to watch your film yet, Franz. But I guess I'm wondering, especially when you have like this sense of urgency. I mean, to do a story like that, it would almost be journalism, right? In a sense. But okay. But my question really is does the campaign matter before the film? I'm sure that you want to was your thought to like initiate change or just follow your characters?
That's a very interesting question. I think it's the same question with, and that's something that we are asked repeatedly now during the distribution process. Oh yeah, Franz, are you an activist, or what motivated you to become an activist? And I would actually say I'm not an activist, but I'm a filmmaker, right? But perhaps we as young filmmakers, we have a totally new, totally fresh attitude when it comes to making films. And I remember that a few years ago with a few friends, I was in a cinema in Leeds in England, and we were just watching it. We were just looking at all the posters and all the films they are screening, and we were just wondering, which of these films, which of these stories here are actually important? Which of these stories are stories that we should discuss in forums like these? Which of these will help us grow as a society? Which of these will actually be good and relevant and important right now? And the answer was, well, almost none of these films. And I think we as a young generation of filmmakers, we have a different attitude when it comes to making films. So for us, it's totally normal to want to tell relevant stories and also to inspire change with that. But that doesn't automatically makes us an activist. It just makes us a full-blood filmmaker, right? So, for example, we were showing the film to many members of parliament in the British Parliament when it came to the big discussion of whether BNOs, British National Overseas in Hong Kong, should have the same rights as British citizens here in the UK. Obviously, a huge discussion, especially after the introduction of the national security law in Hong Kong. And that was normal for us. And obviously, many of the members of parliament were like, oh yeah, it's the first time that, filmmakers are approaching us and showing us a film and inviting us to speak with activists and all that. Let's create this as a new normal. How about this, without always pointing at filmmakers and be like, oh, you're an activist, right? You're an activist. Because we're not. We don't want to put ourselves on or I don't want to put myself on the same level as the three protagonists in our film. I'm in film school at the moment, and many of the professors are always asking, so what's the 3-act story? What's the 3-act structure in your film? Or what's the opening in your film? What's the ending in your film? But perhaps another question could be, why do you need to make this film? And which community are you serving with this film? And if the answer is no one, then this is a different kind of film, right? And I think the right answer in a way, or at least an answer that should be thought about is, so this would be in collaboration with this community or with this individual, or it would help us telling this story. Perhaps it could also be the question, why does this story need a film? Is this a story that can't really be told in another way? Because there are stories that really can't be told in a newspaper article or in a podcast or in a book. There are stories which are crying for a film. So I think that's just a different attitude that many young filmmakers, I think, have. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Franz. That was very insightful, really, especially thank you, Nadira, for asking.
No, I'm
that
so
question.
glad. That was such a great response, because not to make this about me, but that was very validating what you just said, because when I get introduced, it's always Nadira, filmmaker, activist. And I don't really like that moniker, or other people put it on me. But at the same time, it's just I don't see that differentiation between the work and the audience, because there is always a transference of knowledge, and there's always a transference of energy between filmmakers and our audience. And because those things are relational, we do have that social responsibility. And should somebody get a label for that social responsibility, or should we understand that the definition of a filmmaker is to express these things in a way that actually makes an impact in the world? So a filmmaker is just, as you said, we don't necessarily have to be activists, but in Malaysia, it's often kind of separated.
Thank you, Nadira. I agree so much, really. And thank you so much again. All right. Would you please raise your hand now? I'll give you 5 seconds. All right. We have Roxana. You may now unmute yourself. Please introduce yourself as well.
Hello, everyone. I'm Roxana, another fellow jury from EGL. I had a question for Franz. I wanted to ask, the life threats that you get, does that make you rethink bringing any new ideas into your life, or it's not limiting and affecting your creativity level? Thank you.
Can you repeat the question once? Sorry.
The life threats that you keep on getting, unfortunately, do they make you feel like rethink bringing any new ideas into your life, or it's not limiting and affecting your creativity level?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely not limiting anything at the moment. More so, it's an interesting challenge that, because we have to rethink so many processes, we have to rethink so many structures, we had to rethink our whole data management system, for example, in order to make it completely safe. And because we had that challenge, for example, we were able to collaborate with the Harvard University to create the reverse deepfake technology, which helped us to protect or to guarantee the anonymity of our Hong Kong protagonists. So if we wouldn't have had the challenge in the first place, we would have never thought about making this technology or investing more and innovating more in that technology. And now that technology helps many other young filmmakers, for example, right now in Russia and Ukraine, to tell important stories there without having to use a robot voice and sort of dark screen for the faces, right? So I wouldn't say that it is affecting or limiting my creativity or the way I tell stories. More so, I would say, I connected with many other filmmakers who experienced similar stories. It's motivating to hear from other people as well. It's confirming, and sometimes it's a bit challenging to find people who, who are not scared when they hear this for the first time. And when it comes to recruiting people, certainly that is a challenge, because that's also something we want to be completely honest about. But more so then, if you find people who are happy to do that, you know that they will probably be very persistent and very serious and have a very long breath in a way. So I wouldn't say it's limiting my creativity. More so in the opposite, I would say it's actually boosting many processes. And in a way, sometimes I think I'm a quite competitive person, and receiving these threats is also sometimes, it's motivating. It's just like, okay, you don't want us to make the film, you don't want us to distribute the film. Let's see who wins. Let's see if you're really able to stop us. So no, it's not limiting the creativity. More so, I would say it's boosting it. But a great question.
Yeah, thank you so much for answering. And I think we need more brave and bold people like you to share these kind of stories with the world. Like, we appreciate you a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roxana. I agree so much, Franz. It's like what he's doing is that he's turning something negative into positive. Like threats. Who cares about those? Just do what you want. Something like that. Like if you get arrested, just that's something that we need to settle later on. Anyway, all right. So we have lots of questions in the chat box. Again, you may raise your hand if you want to get prioritized. Just saying, even if you already asked it in the chat box, you may still raise your hand. But let's go to Jimmy. He asked so many questions. That's okay. We love that. But let's just, because due to the constraints of time, let's only address one question from him. Something that that caught my eye is, have you ever felt tired or lost the passion of making films in some moment of your life? Let's start with Arjun.
To me, it's an interesting question, because there are times where I don't think it's losing the passion. More so, you feel, I think something Franz said as well, there are times where you take a step back and you sort of assess the number of obstacles that's in your way, and it can get overwhelming at times. That is not something to negate or something to ignore, especially because a lot of the films that I've made have been with sort of like my friends, where we don't have equipment, we don't have this, we don't have that, and it's easy to then in those moments just be like, well, I don't have the lights, or I don't have a proper mic, for me to shoot something. So in those moments, I think it can, the challenges where you're like, how do I do this? Do I really want to do this? But it's in those moments where you really discover if the story that you want to tell means enough for you to actually face those obstacles and overcome it. So for example, even for us, when we started making films, we didn't even have a camera of our own, but it was something as simple as we had an iPad, we had a phone, and that was all that we used for that first film. And it's that sense of never letting whatever obstacle that's in your way, no matter how small, whether it's as small as not having equipment or something as big as Franz was saying, with these incredibly disturbing life threats, whatever it is, there are moments where you will feel like there are so many obstacles that you will have to go through just to make the film that you want to make. But if it is a story that you believe in and that you feel like you need to get out there and that you want to tell, then in that moment you will feel that passion really reignited and strengthened in a way. So yeah.
Thank you, Arjun. That was so insightful, really. I hope the audience learned something from that. All right, so let's proceed with Nadira.
Am I answering the same question?
Yes, yes.
The challenges. No, I was just reflecting on what Arjun said then. I think that I mean, I'm 35 this year, and if I was to be very honest, like I have had moments where I've wanted to quit, and a lot of that was to do with being a minority and having the door slammed in my face and constantly being invalidated and having to deal with the erasure of my own indigenous ancestry and my own identities as a Sabahan, as a Bornean, as like all of the above. And I think that what's good, what's come from it, and it has been very challenging because I've not always liked those versions of myself as I was growing up, because trauma. But the trauma has forced me to become a more spiritual person. I would definitely have to say that. And especially in during the times when I was spending time in like when I was in rural parts of Sabah. I'm Dusun, they're Dusun, but it was just like this really terrible, almost feel like I had this imposter syndrome, feeling that like I'm this third culture sort of Dusun kid trying to connect with my own heritage. I felt like a complete cheeseball in the sense trying to do that, but persisting with that and being in nature was extremely healing. I don't have the traditional filmmaker's journey, as in like I grew up in the peninsula or KL and then just like continued making films with my friends, but that actually has really worked out for the best for me because I have this extraordinary story of how I had to go really deep into my roots, into my heritage, and into the land to just get to know myself all over again. And that has helped me to redefine my own spirituality in the sense that talking about animism, and then I'm learning more about sort of like Momolianism and all of those things. And I have a lot of those liberties and I have that time to invest in it because this is part of my work and it's what I do to document it, not just even document it. Document sounds like a bit of a dry word, but to share what I love about it and why I think that it's relevant to bring these identities into our, cultural consciousness, just in general, because the power that you have as a filmmaker, as somebody who felt very invisible once upon a time, but I realized that the power that you have as a filmmaker is to be able to make everybody feel seen. And that is a very intrinsic, sort of like even as children, that is the thing that you want the most. In an emotional sense, which is to be acknowledged and to be validated. And so those challenges that come with film, honestly, sometimes a lot of the times they just come and go. They come and go. And when you're in the nature of storytelling, there's always a story arc. There's always, the hero's journey and how messy it gets. And behind that, we have our own journey as filmmakers. And a lot of those times, I think eventually as you get older, films are not just about copying other films or making other films. Films are really a way for us to sort of meditate on our own lives. And so with every project I have, I've been able to shed different versions of myself and discover new versions. And that's really such that's I think what keeps me going in this.
Right. Thank you, Nadira, for sharing that. It's something that I hope the audience could also apply in themselves, that this is filmmaking is for me, and that regardless of what happens, we could do it regardless. So yeah, Franz, how about you?
I can very much relate with what Arjun and Nadira just said, and I think it's important to say, and I was even thinking that when you were reading my biography, and it's something also when for example, newspapers are reporting about our film or other young filmmakers, they have a tendency to always say oh yeah, so everything was amazing, right? So Dear Future Children was an amazing project, right? So everything was according to the plan in a way, which is just not really true. And I think what no one is speaking about really are these many, many long nights where sometimes also I was alone, not because nobody wanted to help me, but just because some issues I had to figure out alone. And then you're just there at 2 a.m. having a coffee, trying to deal with these anxieties and just working with no solution inside, and not knowing if this project will ever be made, if there will be any people who are actually seeing the work, because it happens so often that film projects implode at some point. And that's a process, I think, that is part of the game, obviously, and don't want to complain about that. But I think many people have that, and that's just normal. And it's not really, we don't speak about that too often. But that's part of the game. And I would say, challenge, you can always say, filming on the front line was a challenge. Or facing these threats was a challenge, but I think the largest challenge is just this years long persistence that we need in order to make these films.
All right, thank you all panelists for sharing this. This is actually something that aspiring filmmakers should learn from, so that they would be like motivated to make films, even though sometimes we get unmotivated and all fine. So we have someone. Okay, iPad. Could you please unmute and introduce yourself? Oh, okay.
Hi, I'm Yushin 14. I don't know why my name is not showing, but a question for all the panelists. If there is no roadblocks to creating films, no budget cuts, no censorship, no whatsoever, what's one film that you want to produce, direct or write? So, thank you.
Anyone want to take on this first? Arjun, do you want to take this first?
Yeah, sure. That's sort of like, I hope someone said that to me in real life, was like, hey, Arjun, I'm giving you an opportunity, no budget, whatever it is that you want, we'll give it to you. Just tell me what it is that you want to do. I think I would actually not know what to do with myself if someone said that to me in real life. Okay, so coming back to that, if there was honestly genuinely one story that I would want to make, I guess, growing up as a double minority, so not just race but also sexual orientation, growing up as a double minority and being brown and growing up in Malaysia, I think there was never a point in my 25 years of life have I seen, not just like Malaysia, but like in general, I have never seen a single person on screen that looks like me, who has experienced the same things that I have. And like something that the story that I always tell people is the reason that I have a play coming out next year, but we'll talk about that later. So I remember sitting and watching Love, Simon, which was like a TV show thing, and I remember watching it and just being like, I cannot relate. Like, I get it, like, this is what is being presented, and this is probably reality for some people, but there's so many of us that cannot relate to that, and I needed to relate, and then I went off and made that play. So if given the budget or whatever, then maybe I would adapt that play into a feature film. And I think films or stories like that, which are so personal and built on that, they have an opportunity, and I know the weight with what I'm about to say, but it can genuinely save lives, because there were points in time, had I had one person who I could look at and was like, this person is going through what I'm going through and they're doing fine, that would have helped me through so many things that I was dealing with. That would have helped me through so many nights where I felt completely and wholly alone. Right. And that's where I think I would want to contribute as a filmmaker. Yeah.
Thank you, Arjun. I really hope that's something that we would see in the future. Really, I would really watch that. But thank you so much. Okay, so let's go with Franz. Same question.
Yeah, it's an amazing question, obviously, but I have to be a bit boring. I have to say, perhaps I wouldn't want to do that, because Dear Future Children, for example, was made with a very limited budget, but we had people, so for example, we started a crowdfunding campaign where people from all across the globe were able to chip in small amounts of money in order to enable us to make this film. And that is such a key characteristic of the whole film, right? So even how a film is financed or how a film is produced, and also what limits a film has, often is such a key identity of the film. And I think perhaps that would be lost if somebody would make this offer, and if I would just be like, okay, all right, let's go absolutely crazy. We have no relationships anymore with anyone who supported us with money. So maybe I would actually deny that offer, although that seems absolutely crazy to say. And I'm not sure if I would stay to my guts if somebody would actually come up to me. I also wonder, like, where would this happen? I think in a very filmic scenario, that would happen at a bar, perhaps a bit later, and then somebody would come in with a like pink suit or something and would just be like, all right, so 10 million? No problem. Just tell me your bank details.
All right, thank you, Franz. That wasn't boring. That was actually something that that I myself would actually also do, somehow in a bit. Like, but if someone offered me, yeah, I'll do things, right? Okay, how about Nadira? I'm excited to hear about what you would do.
If somebody comes up to me at a film market and makes that pitch towards me, I would be like, this person's trying to launder some money. That's it. It's true, because you have to also think about like that in the process of being able to pitch and position your film. There are always these challenges, and these challenges do inevitably add to the direction of your film eventually. So it's hard to say that, like, even when you have a challenge or a block, in the process of making a film, that still becomes a story of how you made the film in one way or rather, and then you just kind of go on with that. But I heard the question differently. As in, just like, if I had no obstacles, what film would I make? I am very much in the mind right now that I have to get out of my own way. I'm not scared of censorship. I'm not particularly scared of not being able to find funding. To be honest, it's just like the challenge that a lot of filmmakers have is kind of just the disadvantage of inexperience. Disadvantage of inexperience, or like sometimes not even knowing that you can ask your friends for help. There are actually a lot of different ways, So I mean, like, for me, I'm making the film of my dreams right now. I'm working on my first feature film, but I find that the hardest thing, because I saw a lot of questions as well to do with mental health and all, right? Yeah, like, you do always, especially as a director, but like, can be said for many other roles, but you really need to be able to look after yourself in a way that, like, if you concentrate on your energy and your research and giving your all to the particular story, that can create, a really strong team and remind people, your cast, your crew, the audiences, why we do this in the first place. So yeah, I think that, like, yeah, it's kind of starts with you and trying to figure out how to kind of get out of your own way and figure out who you are and what you want to say. And the best stories come from when you're being kind of pretty selfless about it, but looking after yourself at the same time. You can kind of like put the two together. And Arjun,
Yes.
I've always got your back if anything, okay? Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Nadira. Actually, like, honestly, we are on your final year project right now, and I really hope someone comes up to me and asks, like, just pitch that to me as well. But yes, thank you so much, Ishan, for asking that question. All right, so we have a lot of questions in the chat box, so let's address them. Hopefully, like, we don't have time unfortunately for everyone, but okay. From Naomi, what are some mental and emotional challenges you face when making high-risk films in terms of taboo topics like this? And does it ever affect the production time? And for example, have you ever changed your mind and completely ended production? So let's start with Arjun, because I'm butchering the name, but that film is could be a highly controversial if it is already not controversial, especially there's like this one scene, right, about like a Muslim girl wanting to eat pork, right? Okay, so would you answer that?
Yeah. So sorry, I'm just reading the question again. So what are some mental and emotional challenges you face in making? I think it's very important. It's actually a very good question, because it's also understanding why you're making that film. Because I think it's very easy, especially for new filmmakers, right, is to attempt to tackle a taboo or controversial subject because you think it's going to make noise, or because it's going to make waves. And so first, just before anything, understanding that you're picking this subject matter for a very specific purpose, and that's, a very specific story you want to tell. And the next thing that I want to say is, it's very important to not only check in with yourself, but also an entire team. So something that I really appreciated with Mantega, because that was one of my first times ever being on a film set, was there was constant checking in, not just with the actors, but the production crew. So we're talking even PAs, we're talking everyone that was on set at any point, if anyone's feeling uncomfortable with something that we're shooting, or, if they're, because we did also handle the topics of grief and loss, and those are very heavy topics to surround yourself with for however many hours a day, however many days a week. So having that culture of being mindful of each other's emotional states and mental states, and having a really good producer. We had Meng, who is incredible, who's always checking in and being like, does anyone need anything? If you need time, if you're shooting a scene and you need just to walk away for 10 minutes and compose yourself, that is allowed. And having that, said verbally and explicitly is something that I hope, more production crews implement, because it is very important. So that's talking about in terms of like the mental, emotional challenges. In terms of timelines and has it ever affected production? For us, again, personally, no, just because we already have these precautions in mind. And this is why I brought up the idea of know why you're attempting to even tackle these issues. Because if you are very clear of that from the get-go, then every time an issue arises, or anytime a new threat or whatever arises, you are always ready to remind yourself of why you embarked on this journey in the first place. And if that is a strong enough reason, then that is strong enough reassurance as well throughout your journey. So yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Arjun. All right, so Nadira?
Okay, I talked a little bit about mental health and spirituality a little bit, but this is a creative way that I kind of overcame, I guess, an aspect of mental health that was very challenging to me, is that as somebody who was underrepresented as a minority, I felt like I was being gaslit in my own country all the time, because people would say that, oh, Malaysia's Malay, Indian, Chinese, and everybody eats nasi lemak and like twin towers, and they were just like, and then I would being in the position where I had to go into a room and I'm with a client and I'm terrified, because I'm like, okay, is yours like the 1957 Malaysia or the 1963 actual Malaysia? So there were a lot of these clashes, and I always found that people in the peninsula tended to watch my films differently. I'm not blaming anybody, but this is the lack of representation can do. It can actually kind of just like put a blanket on an entire community, or it can change an entire national landscape of what we understand a national landscape is. So that became very problematic for me, because the thing is just like, it almost felt that like my identity was being invalidated when I would show my films from Sabah. And so what I did from that was that I started to do film screenings. So I would program not just independent Malaysian film screenings, but short films that were from Borneo, and I would be able to contextualize it because I knew what a lot of our challenges were, not just in the industry sense, but in the socio-political sense. And I took from this Chinese idiom called san ren chen hu, which is 3 people make a tiger. So if one person sees one tiger in a village, they're like, yeah, that person's crazy. If you see 2, then it's just like, oh, they're friends. If you see 3, that means the tiger's real. So I mean, it's a very different interpretation of the idiom, but for myself, I kind of thought of it in the sense that like, if I put 3 films together, at least 3 films together, it becomes a conversation and people don't think I'm crazy. And then they don't think that, okay, this Nadira is just like flying back and forth between East and West Malaysia. I'm like, look, these other filmmakers are doing it too. And so building communities in a sense really helped me to challenge gaslighting, which had, which we know is a form of like manipulation or abuse. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Nadira. Of course, last but not least, Franz.
Yeah, I can very much relate to what you just said. I think for me personally, an emotional challenge also was just to experience people getting killed on the front line while filming Dear Future Children. Just something that we knew could happen, and obviously, as a film team, we are not the victims here. We are deciding to go there. We want to tell these stories, right? So we know that this could happen, but still, it's important to have this this net of emotional support, because it's so interesting. Our film industry is so much focused on that, health and safety, like physically is everything all right, that nobody is getting any physical injuries, but the emotional health and safety is often a bit overlooked and not really well thought in a way. So that's just something that we wanted to nail when it comes to making Dear Future Children, something where we had many group therapy sessions where we spoke about that. And obviously these are impacts and effects on us that will change our lives in a small way and will definitely impact us for a long time. And it's just so important that everybody, when joining the project, is aware that this could happen and how we are going to react to that. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for I'm trying to gather my emotions right now, because honestly, everyone's thoughts on this, especially when it comes to mental health and emotional health, is something that needs to be taken seriously, because especially in filmmaking, sometimes we just lose our sanity when making films. And but I hope that the audience will not be discouraged in making films. Hopefully I'll see you maybe in MMU, who knows, right? If you want to apply. Anyway, unfortunately, we do not have the time to entertain all questions, but if it's okay with the panelists, could they contact you or message you to answer some of their questions? Would that be okay? All right, so okay, dear audience, you may if you would like, you could send us the message, your questions, and we will forward them to our dear panelists, and they could answer that. But at the same time, you could also, those who are in Facebook, you may also leave the questions in the comments, and if our panelists are free, they may also check on it. So it's actually it's still going to be in our Facebook page, which I will promote later on. Unfortunately, that will be the last question that we will entertain today again. So all right. So we are almost at the end. Actually, this is already the end of the event. Dearest panelists, we would like to see your future endeavors. So may I invite each one of you to promote what you are currently up to, so our audience would follow your journey. Actually, I would follow your journey as well. So should we start with Nadira? What are your plans right now?
Oh my God, I had to do the pitch. I am currently working on my debut feature film titled Wilderness, which I've been developing for the last 11 years now. Super crazy. But yeah, we'll be shooting soon. And it is about, I guess, the terse relationship between a young man and his abusive father, but also telling the story of the Tarab, which is a monster of Kadazan Dusun folklore that swallows sun and casts the whole city into darkness. So yeah, about the breakdown of the Kadazan Dusun patriarchal family, the usual. So yeah, hopefully that'll be coming out by next year, and we'll be able to go to the Malaysian cinema and watch a Sabahan film in the screens.
I will personally look forward to that. Thank you so much for sharing. All right, Franz, how about you? What are you up to right now?
We are currently in development for a next feature film about two very, very brave journalists who are uncovering a huge geopolitical crisis in West China. And yeah, we're looking forward to working on that. We already have an amazing team of screenwriters and script editors. And if you want to stay posted on that, my contact details are on my website. You can always just shoot me an email. Yeah, thanks so much. And also just want to underscore again, it was so great speaking with you all. And yeah, thanks for your time.
All right, thank you, friends. We hope to see your next film. All right, how about you, Arjun? What are you up to?
Right, so in terms of film projects, we are still doing our best to promote Mentega Terbang. So that is a film that we're hoping to, because we've only been able to do private screenings in Kuala Lumpur, and we are very much of the opinion that this is a movie that all Malaysians need to see. So we are, in talks of trying to tour Malaysia and then hopefully, get on some sort of streaming platform in the future. So in terms of that, that's Mentega Terbang. But also just to come back to the play, I know it's not a film, but it's a play that I believe in very heavily. It's called Amma Chalam, which is the Tamil translation for Mother's Darling, and it will be hopefully also staged end of this year or early next year by Anomalous Production, which is the same production company that is putting out Mentega. So Anomalous is very, just committed to putting out stories that need to be told, especially from communities or stories that we don't normally hear. So do follow them. If Anomalous Production is a great place to go for, underrepresented stories. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Arjun. Again, I would also look forward to your future projects, and hopefully all our audiences. Actually, we have a lot of international audience, mostly from Qatar and Philippines. So I hope they would be able to watch your films, and also Dear Future Children and whatever Nadira is up to. I'm pretty sure that they would love to hear from that, to watch all that. Anyway, so before I end this webinar, dear friends, please don't leave yet. I would like to thank you, because audience, without you, this wouldn't have been a thing, But yes, thank you so much for attending. Of course, our dearest panelists, thank you so much for lending us the time, and thank you for sharing your passion and the challenges. I hope that the audience, especially those who are aspiring filmmakers, learn something from this webinar. And of course, the organizers of this webinar, Cinematic Arts Society of Faculty of Cinematic Arts from Multimedia University. Thank you guys so much, and also thank you for lending me the title of being a moderator. Thank you so much. And of course, to our advisor lecturers, Mr. Ghazi and Mr. Furkan, thank you so much for your guidance. Without you, our team would have fallen down already. But thank you so much.